Hello, and welcome to this educational platform of Ghatana Chakra Book video. Our aim is to deliver knowledge to you in a simple, clear, and accessible manner. Let us begin this journey of learning and success.
All right, today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to check the pulse of India's economy. But we're not just looking at the big, flashy headlines. Nope, we're going deep right down to the household level, using the very latest government data to see how people are really doing.
So that brings up a great question, right? How do you actually take an economy's temperature? I mean, beyond all the stock market noise and those huge GDP numbers, how do you figure out what's truly happening in the day-to-day lives of more than 1 billion people?
Well, the answer, as it often is in the data. We're going to unpack two absolute powerhouse surveys for 2023-24, the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey and the Periodic Labor Force Survey. Together, they paint a fascinating picture. So, let's get into it.
First up, let's follow the money. Seriously, one of the best ways to get a real feel for an economy's health is to just look at what people are spending. It tells you so much about confidence, about growth, about what's really going on.
To do that, we use this metric with a kind of clunky name, Monthly Per Capita Consumption Expenditure, or MPC for short. But don't let the name fool you. The idea is super simple. It's just the average amount of cash one person spends in a month. Think of it like, what's in the average person's shopping basket at the end of the month?
So, for 2023-24, what does that shopping basket look like? Well, in rural India, the average person is spending about 4,122 rupees a month. Head to the cities, and that number jumps up to almost 7,000 rupees. Now, that gap isn't new, but the real question is, are things getting better? And the answer is a big yes. Just look at the jump from the year before. Rural spending is up from around 3,800 rupees, and urban spending is up from about 6,500. So the takeaway here is pretty clear. Households both in the countryside and in the cities are spending more. That's a really solid sign. Okay, so that raises another huge question, right? If spending is going up, is that growth being shared? Is that long-standing gap we just talked about between urban and rural India actually getting any smaller?
And this chart tells a pretty compelling story. The gap, which is basically how much more city folks spend compared to rural folks, is definitely shrinking. If you go back to 2011, it was a massive 84% difference. Fast forward to now, and it's down to 70%. It's a slow burn for sure, but the trend is undeniable.
Now let's bring in a slightly more technical tool that economists love to use. It's called the Gini coefficient. All you need to know is it measures inequality on a scale from 0 to 1. And the best way to think about it is like a golf score. 0 is perfect equality, and just like in golf, a lower number is always better.
So what's the score for India? Well, check this out. In rural areas, the Gini score dropped in just 1 year. That's a significant move towards more equality.
And it's not just a rural story. We see the exact same thing happening in urban areas, where the score also took a tumble. So by this key measure, things are getting more equal across the board.
Okay, so people are spending more, and inequality is heading down. But what's actually powering all this? Well, a huge piece of that puzzle has to be jobs. So now, let's switch gears to our second report, the Labor Force Survey, to see what's happening in the job market.
This survey basically gives us 3 headline numbers that, when you put them together, give you a really solid snapshot of the employment situation in the country. So let's just walk through them one by one.
First up is the labor force participation rate. This is pretty simple. It's the percentage of people who are old enough to work and who are either already working or are actively out there looking for a job. And for 2023-24, that number is 60.1%. Next, we've got the worker population ratio. So, of all those people who are available to work, how many of them actually have a job? That's what this tells us. And as you can see, it's pretty close, at 58.2%.
And that tiny gap between those last two numbers? Well, that's what gives us our final and maybe most famous metric, the unemployment rate. The survey clocks it in at a pretty stable 3.2%.
All right. We've looked at spending, we've looked at inequality, and we've just looked at the jobs picture. So let's take a step back and try to connect all these dots. What is all this data really telling us?
When you put it all together, a really clear story emerges. You've got household spending on the rise everywhere. At the same time, that historic gap between the cities and the countryside is closing, and inequality is falling. And all of this seems to be built on the foundation of a labor market that, at least by these key numbers, looks pretty darn stable. So yeah, the data paints a pretty positive picture for 2023-24. But here's the thing about data. It's always a look in the rearview mirror.
Which leaves us with the big question, right? What's it going to take to keep this momentum going? And maybe more importantly, what are the challenges we need to tackle to make sure this growth really does reach everyone? Some to think about. Thanks for tuning in.